What is worship? Why should I worship? How do I worship? Welcome to the Worship Project podcast with Ben, Dayne, Kira, and Ryan. If you have questions about worship, you've come to the right place.
Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 3 of the Worship Project podcast. We have been gathering to share all things worship related. What is worship? That was our episode 1. Why do we worship? That was our episode 2. And today we're going to drill down and we're going to have a look at corporate worship, or in other words, when we gather together as a body, as a group of people. What does that worship space look like? Is there a space for that? And then we're going to look at individual worship. So if you want a dichotomy, we'll say corporate worship versus individual worship. That's what we're going to explore today. But it is episode 3. So if you've missed the first 2, please pause, go back, look at those episodes, because we're building. Each of these episodes really is building. We've covered a lot of ground, and so I don't want you to miss out on any of that valuable content. But team, as we look at this question of individual and corporate worship, I'm wondering if we can share a little bit more about our own backgrounds, a bit of our own contexts, and that type of thing, just in a small bite-sized segment, because I think it's important for our readers, for our listeners to hear where we all come from. So Kira, would you like to share what's been a bit of your individual, what's been a bit of your corporate worship experience?
Yeah, sure. I'll share individual first. So I grew up in a Christian family, and we were part of the Adventist faith, and what it was so cool to be able to grow up with that. And as we grew up, we started with the little My Bible Friends books, and they'd get read to us, and the Bible get read to us. And then as I got older, I decided to take more of that on for myself. And what a blessing it was to be able to do Bible studies and get baptized and just really start to read scripture for myself. And as I've gotten older, that's kind of changed up a little bit. Sometimes for me, worship can be playing a song. It can be doing a Bible study that's a bit more in depth. I love Bible journaling, and then especially Bibles that I can write in the margins of. And that's so fun because you can dig in super deep. And sometimes, got to be honest, sometimes personal worship is opening up my Bible app and looking at the verse of the day and reading the devotional. And that's all I can manage that day. And that's just been transparent. And then switch gears, I'll do corporate as well. So I grew up in Sydney and in this awesome little church called Thornley Church. And it was a really good church to grow up in. But the thing is, when you're a teenager and you're one of the only teenagers at the church, you start to feel a little bit because I was looking around, I was thinking, I don't know about, this music isn't really for me, and I don't know how I feel about this. And I kind of got to a place though, as I got, I got a bit older, I got into university, and I was actually, I really like this. And I think because I got to have different expressions of worship as well. And in one place, it was a little bit more what we'd call traditional. And in other places, it was a little bit different. And so I started seeing beauty in every expression of that. And now I get to pastor at Caboolture Church in South Queensland. And it's really cool. It actually reminds me of my home church, Thornley. Just a lot bigger. And what I love about the church is that, there's a willingness to come together to worship God and to see this community come together, even though there's differences, and someone likes this song and someone likes this song, and it all comes together, even in spite of these differences, to form this beautiful, family. And we still get to worship together. And some weeks people love some of these songs, and other weeks people love some of these songs, or they love the sermon one week and they love the sermon another week. And it's cool to come together in spite of our differences.
Yeah.
And that.
Yeah. No, that's awesome, Kira Lee. Ryan, would you like to share a little bit about your context?
Yeah. So growing up, dad was Roman Catholic and mum was Seventh-day Adventist. I was super blessed. I got to go to church twice a week. You take that, everyone. I grew up going to church twice a week. But for my mum, if I'm here as a pastor, as a Christian, it was the family worships that my mum did, and religion was a hot topic in our home. It was actually a very hot topic, and my mum would always be trying to get faith into us. A little divergence, but I had a few arguments with my dad as a teenager and in my early 20s, and one of the things I found out was that he assumed that sending me to a Catholic boys' school would impart faith to me that he had, because that's what had worked for him. And I said to him, look, actually, the reason I've journeyed towards the Adventist expression of Christianity was because Mum poured into me. And she read My Bible Friends and the Big Blue set. I always forget, what is that one? It's not My Bible Friends. It was Bible something.
The Bible Story.
The Bible Story.
Maybe.
So Mum used to read that to us, just little parts. That was our worship. I'm from the Seychelles. And when she came from the Seychelles, she brought this little manila folder and it had maybe 40 songs that she sang in her youth group. And we learned all of those songs. So family worship for us was that. That became worshipful for me to read those blue books. And in time, that sort of evolved to reading my Bible more. But that was a real foundational, that helped lay a love for reading the Bible. I'm not going to say I was, a perfect kid and I read it every day. When I think of corporate worship, the thing that stands out most to me, I grew up in a very traditional Adventist church, would look very typical to most Adventist churches. It was a lot of hymns. There was a sermon. We had 3 chairs where the most important people sat on a Sabbath, the thrones, I call them. But for me, probably one of the most impactful things was joining our church had a youth choir, and we had this really gifted pianist, and she could basically take sheet music and transpose that onto our voices. And there was this power of singing together these complex melodies. She was able to draw out of us something very beautiful. And that really shaped my picture of what corporate worship could be. Obviously, the congregation's not singing 3-piece harmonies all the time, but it was a picture of when the church is working together and we're all bringing our best. This is what worship can look like. So those were very formative things for me. Today, my personal worship looks like, I really like to read through the Psalms. I try and read a Psalm every day, and ask God to speak through that Psalm to me on any given day. There is the reading I do for my sermon prep. But I really try and dig deep into the Psalms and maybe one Bible story at the moment or passage other than that. So that's a little bit of what I do. Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. And Ben?
When I think about corporate and personal worship, I can't disconnect that from the why of those things. And so what comes to mind is I find these kind of worships, the corporate worship and the personal worship, things that recalibrate me. And so when I think about corporate worship, I'm thinking about coming together with other believers and being made aware of God's presence. And for me, one of those things was music. As I was a teenager growing up in the church, I became almost weekly involved in music at my church. And I think what that did was help reorient my worldview and my mind to being more focused on God's presence and where he should be a priority in my life. And so that's where I think about, from a corporate perspective, that's kind of my experience in that place. More recently in my personal journey, and if I stick with that recalibrating idea of what worship does for me in that personal sense, is that I was listening to a podcast and the presenter was advocating that what we listen to, what we consume or what we view at the very first moment of awakening and what we take in at the very last moment of being awake is key to how we see our whole day. Okay. And the way that he presented that was that it's like the thing that you pick up first is the lens that you put on that you see everything else that happens throughout the rest of the day. Now, I'm no psychologist, so I don't know how legitimate that is, but just from an anecdotal point of view, one of the things that I've been challenged with is to try and make sure the very first thing that I look at or do when I wake up is something that recalibrates me towards God. And I, as I say, this is just anecdotal, but for me, that has made an impact in my world because that's the lens that I start the day with. It's the lens that I start talking to my wife with. It's the lens that I deal with my kids. It's the lens that is there. And sure, there's a whole heap of other lenses that come on top of that, but that is something. And even at night, you know, what's that last thing that you're recapping your day with? And for me, I've found that from a personal perspective, I need that to be God because I really want him. Sometimes functionally, I don't behave that way, that God's the number one, but I want him to be. So to me, that's a way of trying to recalibrate the way that I think to put him in that number one place.
It's good that we've got, you know, from different areas, different walks of life we've been able to come because I suppose my contribution perhaps to this discussion is that I don't grow up in an Adventist family in an Adventist context. My parents were Christian and godly Christians, and they were a wonderful example on me. And my primary sort of church setting was more of a Pentecostal charismatic kind of group. And that was where, you know, corporate worship happened for me. But it's interesting because coming into the Adventist church as an adult, we use these phrases like family worship. Okay. And when I first heard that, I'm like, what's family worship? I just don't have no idea what that is. I mean, I can kind of read between the lines and understand that it must be something that mum and dad do with the kids before they go to bed or when they get up in the morning or something like that. But it was just the way it was framed and presented to me as an outsider coming in. Family worship, it was new to my vocabulary because in my Christian context growing up, yes, of course we were encouraged to read the Bible, and indeed we did read the Bible. You know, of course we, you know, listened to music, to worship music and all that type of thing, but it just wasn't ever packaged as this is family worship. Yeah. You know, and it's just an observation. That just is what it is. I'm not saying that we're right or that we're wrong in packaging it as family worship, but it's just interesting that we've maybe what the implication of us using that vocabulary is that we're sort of trying to define worship in ways that we're sort of trying to move away from a little bit as part of this podcast. Well, we're trying to broaden our understanding of worship, but if we continue to insist on calling, you know, sitting down, reading the Bible, if we call that worship, then is that helpful? Is it not helpful? I don't know. That might be a discussion that we have presently. But nonetheless, so my corporate worship experience has been in churches outside the SDA church. Family worship, well, yes, but it wasn't framed that way. And of course now, being a pastor in the Seventh-day Adventist church, I've had the privilege of pastoring in more traditional churches and also more middle of the road and more contemporary ones. And in fact, it's interesting because my current ministry context at Springwood Church, I actually have both. Yeah. So we're one church, but our one church has two services that run at the same time. One is our traditional church, which happens in the church with exactly what you would think about church with pews and then we have at the same time a contemporary service that that is exactly what you would probably assume in a contemporary service, where we have, the band up front, we have the lights, and it's not pews, but it's the chairs, and it's more of an auditorium sort of thing. They both happen at the same time at my church, so I kind of get the best of both worlds, which is fantastic. But I raise that to say that there is a place in Adventism for both of those expressions of our church to work together. And I can testify that I get to see that on a weekly basis, that both of those traditional and more contemporary expressions of corporate worship do work together. We all love each other. We all serve on the same board. We all serve on the same committees, and we're working together to influence our community. And so I think that, of course, I'm proud of my church as a church pastor, and I'm definitely biased, but I just say that to say that in our conversations now, we're not for 1 second suggesting that, the church ought to lean in this direction or ought to lean in that direction. I don't think we don't want to give off that impression, because we believe that worship transcends what the liturgy or and instead these things can live together. So that's corporately. And individually, look, my goodness, it's taken on all sorts of expressions over the years. Presently, my practice is to read through not just like one verse, but to read through good chunks, and I feel that that's a habit that I need at this moment in order to really grasp narratives and to grasp stories, rather than just little isolated verses, which can sometimes be our temptation, especially if we're reading through devotionals where sometimes it's just one verse and a whole lot of commentary. But if we're reading a couple of chapters each morning, I think for me, I'm finding a lot of benefit in that presently. So we share that with our listeners, because we just want you to know that, we're normal people. We have our context in which we come from, and we hope that they can actually not be diminished, but shine in our presentations and in our comments. And hopefully you resonate with at least some of our stories in one way. But let's just focus on corporate worship just for a second. Let's let that be our attention, and we'll get to individual worship later.
You're listening to the Worship Project podcast.
So let's just look at corporate worship. What are some of the benefits around corporate worship? And maybe we'll ask the question: is this Christian life? Are we supposed to live as hermits? Right? What's the purpose? What's the benefit of corporate worship? What should that look like? And Kira, would you like to maybe just start us off? Like, are we supposed to be hermits? Like, what's?
Yeah, that's been an interesting question, right? Like, and it's been one that I've been thinking about for years. Sounds weird, but the basic thought is, you have a hermit. They live in the mountains. They love Jesus. Are they getting a full Christian experience? And I think they are certainly saved if they love Jesus, but I think that they're missing out, because I think that God has given us the church for a reason. And I think that it's really, what a privilege to be able to engage with it. In 1 Corinthians 12, and we find this idea of the church as the body, right? Yeah. And I think if you're isolating yourself, then you're missing some body parts.
Yeah, indeed. And Ryan, what's the benefit? What's the reason for this corporate worship setting?
Yeah, the word, the body, just come to my mind. I think we've referenced like that we listen to podcasts, but one of the podcasts I listened to a while back, which was really shaped my thinking on this, was the rise and fall of Mars Hill, and it looked at sort of mega church culture. We're not having a go to anyone in the mega church system, but often in church settings, mega church or otherwise, there's this tendency to build up a singular figure who becomes the face of the church. And so much pressure is on that person to perform, and we can overlook a lot of their foibles to let them shine in a speaking capacity. When they sort of looked under the hood, they're like, it's really been detrimental to the church when we see that happen. And so the take home was, church has to be a body. It can't just rest on the shoulders of one or a few. God's really gifted his church with this ability to see him most completely when a myriad of voices are coming together to show him. You think of that saying of that story. It's that Indian folktale of the people who are trying to describe the elephant. You know the story, and one's touching the legs and one's touching the ears and the trunk and the tail, and they're like, no, this is what an elephant is. But were they all wrong? No, they weren't wrong. They were each right, but it took that collective coming together that would paint a complete picture. And I think church is very much like that. I mean, this podcast, for those of you listening, it's been like that. This group, we're from all the parts of the country, and having all of your voices come together to talk about worship has been a blessing to me so far. And I think it's a little microcosm of what church is meant to be like. Yeah.
Yeah, great. And Ben?
I'm not sure where you want me to go here, Dayne.
Yeah, well, I mean, wherever you, in a sense, wherever you want to go, Ben.
Yeah.
I mean, the big question was why corporate worship, why gathering together, why that? And Kira said, well, you know, if we live in isolation, we're robbing ourselves of something. Ben's just touched on how beautiful it is for mutual edification and so on and so forth. So yeah, whatever you want to do, really.
I guess when I think about corporate worship, I'm reminded of a reflection that C.S. Lewis made. Now, C.S. Lewis was a kind of famous Christian writer, and he was part of a literary group called the Inklings, and there was a number of writers in there. J.R.R. Tolkien was one of them, and this group of men grew up together in a sense, both professionally and spiritually matured, and it brought about this enduring friendship. But tragically, one of the things that happened was that one of those men, his name was Charles, he died much earlier than all the other members of the group. And as the group processed that grief, and C.S. Lewis processed that grief, he felt like they weren't whole like they were once before. And one of the things that he says in one of his books, The Four Loves, he says, in each of my friends, there is something that only some other friend can fully bring out. And so he after his friend dies, he doesn't just miss Charles, but he misses out on what Charles used to bring out of the other friends that he has. And so there's this element that I think as a corporate, as a group, there's something about me that will bring something out of you that these two can't do. And I think there's something key about, and you talked about the body of Christ, there's something about how together we can actually be drawn closer to God. We can have a greater revelation of who God is because we're part of a group. And I think even if we look back to Genesis and we think about what it says, who was made in the image of God, really we have the Adam, humanity was made in the image of God. And in his vision, in God's vision, it's that we all collectively can image God and represent who he is. And I think hopefully as a church, we're committed to that and committed to actually representing God accurately as best we can to those in the world. But to do that well, we need to do that and bring things out in each other. And to me, that's a massive part of why I think corporate worship is just so important, because that poor hermit, he doesn't get to hear what someone, like he doesn't even get to hear what someone might bring out in him. Because someone talking to that hermit might actually let him tap into something within himself, and he misses out on that if he doesn't engage in corporate worship.
I think it raises a good point what you're saying though, Ben, because a lot of corporate worship is very one-directional. It's people at the front sharing, but we need to find the spaces to share with each other. And I think if that's something that could come out of our conversation.
I think we'll move in a second to some of the challenges, and perhaps there's some challenges in the way that we stereotypically do do corporate worship. I just want to build upon a thought that you shared, Ben, around, God created us as one humanity, okay? And of course, when we look around the world today, I suppose, can I say, the spirit of this world does a very, very good job at actually fragmenting that picture of humanity.
Yeah.
There's these ethnic groups, there's the older people, the younger people, there's the people who are New South Wales supporters and Maroon supporters.
I started that in the first podcast, sorry.
But the world actually wants us to separate and to be in these fractions and these groups. But of course, the ultimate picture we get of the new creation is that there is no, every tribe, language, nation, tongue are all together in the one creation, praising God. And I say all that to say this, right? That why go to church? Well, actually, by the power of the Holy Spirit, we've got this mandate to bring what will be a future promise. We're called to make that a reality in the present.
Yes.
Okay.
Come on.
That as the church gathers in all of its plurality, in all of its diversity, right? It's actually to point the world toward what is going to come. And the passage that I turn to for this is in Ephesians chapter 3. And I just want to unpack some of these verses because I think they're so important for framing this question of corporate worship. Because Paul says in Ephesians 3 verse 2, he says, "Surely you have heard about the administration of God's grace that was given to me for you. That is, the mystery made known to me by revelation." And as I've already written briefly. So Paul's saying, surely you've all heard about the grace that's been given me to share with you this mystery. And we're going, oh, what's this mystery? Oh my goodness, what are you talking about, Paul? This is exciting. And he goes in verse 4, in reading this then, you will be able to understand my insight into the mystery of Christ. And we're leaning in now because we're going, what's the mystery of Christ? What's this mystery? This is great. This is fantastic. In verse 6, this mystery is this, that through the gospel, the Gentiles are heirs together with Israel. Okay? That we have this, so in the first century, you got the Jews over here, and you got the Gentiles over here. The Gentiles are these unclean, filthy, immoral, and whereas us Jews, we've got it all together, we're perfect. But the mystery of Christ is that through the good news, these two separate fractions are members of the one body and sharers together in the promise of Jesus Christ. That the gospel is about deconstructing these boundaries, deconstructing these separate, and it's bringing this humanity back together now. And then I love verse 10. His intent, God's intent, was that now through the church, the manifold wisdom of God should be made known to who? To the rulers and authorities in the heavenly realms, according to the eternal purpose that he accomplished in Christ Jesus our Lord. In other words, as these different people come together and as stuff works, as they're united in peace, as they're united in purpose, as they're united in worship, right? This is actually a spectacle to the principalities and powers of the wisdom of God, because the fact that these people are here getting along is a miracle of God, because this does not happen in the world, right? If you put these people in a room, according to the world, these people are at each other's throats. They're ripping it. They're waging war. They're this person, that. But actually, oh my goodness, look at this ecclesia. Look at this church. It's Jew and Gentile. It's slave and free. It's male and female, and they're getting along, and they're sharing a meal with each other. And what is going on here? This is a miracle of God. And it's like, well, yes, my friend, this is the power of the gospel on display in front of you right here and right now. And guess what? This is going to be our reality for all eternity one day when he comes again. Why not receive his Holy Spirit and be part of this now? Like, what I'm trying to say is that there's a missional aspect in our corporate worship gatherings. And
who wouldn't want to be part of that miracle?
100%.
Who wouldn't want to be part of that miracle?
And today I think it's so, like you say, it's like this testimony to this kingdom that's coming, right? And like you said, there's so many things that try and just divide us and tell us who to be. And I think especially, something that's becoming increasingly relevant is we look at the United States, we see what's happening there, and there are people who will refuse to worship with somebody who does not share the same political view as them, and who thinks that they're wrong and refuses to even, acknowledge them as a Christian brother and sister. And I think it's so fantastic that we get to come together with our different even political views and everything else. And like you say, it's that pointing to that future reality, and it's even more important that we keep intentionally doing that.
You're listening to the Worship Project podcast.
So we gather corporately because, yes, it's great because, we get to mutually edify each other and bring, but my argument is that we gather together corporately because that is our mission to resist the divisions and the evil in this world by saying we're going to come together and we're going to be one body. So
yeah, because I guess the temptation is to say, oh well, when we come together for church, it's just for us.
Yeah.
And you could kind of see that as, oh, well, isn't that a little bit selfish? It's almost like you're going into a club, but you're saying it is missional, and done right, church is 100% missional because it's such a cool opportunity to involve new people in this family to grow even larger in that.
It drives home hard the words that Jesus said, "The world will know you're my disciples if this group of people can love each other." And you're like, man, all these people from all these different parts of the world and these different walks of life, to be able to do that is a powerful witness for the gospel, like you've said. It's something we need to keep striving for.
Oh yeah, quite, and indeed we will strive for until we've been given our new resurrection bodies that are free from the powers of sin and death. But these are some of the great benefits, and I hope we've been able to persuade our listeners in some way that hey, going to worshiping corporately is a good thing. But let's be honest. Okay, we're all pastors. We've all lived in this world for longer than like a second. There's challenges. There's things that we see in corporate settings that, are they constructive? Are they beneficial? Are they just things that we've done because we've always done them? And is it time to let some of these things go? I want us just to explore some of these challenges that we have in terms of corporate worship and what that means for us as people who want to pursue authentic corporate worship.
I can't help but thinking when you share that is the disagreements that can come along in corporate worship, and I think how do we love people? Like how do we represent that miracle that you shared? And I think maybe do we think it's natural that when we come together we should get along? Like, do we fall into the trouble of, okay, we believe in Jesus, so we should all it's natural for us to get along. And I wonder whether by doing that, we lose some of the mystery and miracle of what you've just been talking about. Some of the mystery, yeah. And so I think about that and I'm like, how quick, is our first impulsive reaction to a trouble to pray and say, God, here we are again. We need your miracle because we're not getting along here, or, we don't know how to deal with this situation, or this person feels really strongly about this, but yet these people don't. I'm not sure that we do. I wonder whether, let's follow the church manual, let's take it to the board and that kind of thing. And I'm not saying that is exclusively it's not necessarily one or the other, but I do wonder, are we so consciously aware of this miracle, and then the moment we find that there's a problem, do we go to God and say, God, we need your miraculous power again, shape our hearts, give us wisdom, help us to navigate this?
A word that I picked up on that you said is the word mystery, right? Because I think in our corporate worship gatherings that there's a bit of a tension that we feel. I think we want structure and we want organisation, but then do we want, like, to what extent do we want structure and organization? This is, I think, a tension that we sometimes feel, right? And when I think back to, like, historical expressions of the church, you know, I've got friends in the Orthodox tradition, for example. One of the reasons why they gather corporately is to participate in the mystery of the incarnation, the mystery of communion, or they would call it, like, you know, the Eucharist. Participate in the mystery of the resurrection. There's a whole lot of mystery, and that comes with you know, a sensory experience. And I don't know, Ryan, I know you mentioned you grew up in a Roman Catholic. In your sum of experiences, when we talk about mystery, do you resonate with a little bit of that? Or
it's interesting to go there in this setting.
Yeah.
The Adventist podcast, talking about my experiences in the Catholic Church. But there did seem to be this element, and what they would call their church service would be the liturgy, right? It's the church. It's a very written thing, and in many ways, it is predictable. So there is an element that's not mysterious, but there was. I remember every Sunday I'd go with my dad. There was this word that the priest would say, which was, "Let us explore the mystery of our faith." And there was this part of the service where there was an acknowledgement that God is bigger than what we can articulate, and there's still more to learn. And it's interesting for me quoting that, you know, because, you know, we have an interesting relationship with the Catholic Church, but I feel in our own settings, we often love a clean full stop at the end of the service. There is nothing more to be said on the topic. This is a definitive way of looking at things. And I think there needs to be a little bit of room to go, this is what we know, and ... You know, like, I want to let you just wrestle and explore and imagine. And sometimes I think we've sort of lost sight of that ability to just have a big imagination of what God's doing. But we've got really good theology that's so comprehensive, and sometimes it boxes God so neatly that we just fail to dream a little, I feel. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I wonder if, like, thinking about, like, reaching our secular you know, audience, our people in our world, like, can we be, I wonder, a little bit too quick to want to jump in and give the right answer, that we don't dwell in, like, in some of the mystery, like you know, I'm also reflecting on what you said earlier, Kira, about, you know, the temple being this sensory experience. Okay, and when we go to church, how does that translate? Like, the temple was full of symbols, which created a sense of mystery and transcendence, and God is wow, and and we're in wonder and we're in awe. And I suppose now, when we reflect on our current, you know, structure and our current liturgies, for want of a better word, like, is there something that we're missing? Like, is anyone willing to explore that a little bit more?
Yeah, I think that there needs to be maybe a willingness to get a little bit more responsive. Mm-hmm. And we do respond to God at corporate worship, you know. Many people would say it's not a church service if you don't sing. And the great thing about singing is you have these people leading out, yes, but then how beautiful is it to have the congregation singing with them and responding? And I think that's part of the experience, because oftentimes you're even standing as well. So that gives us added element to it, right? And I think just creating little touchstones where you can, that just involve more of the senses even. And I like what Ben said in that episode as well. You're not just doing it for the sake of it. You're not just doing it because you want things to look pretty, or, you know, you want anything else like that. No, you want it to point to Jesus. And I think that when we consider our current models of church, sometimes they don't quite cater to the way that we actually learn. Because we learn through these different through our different senses, and God 100% knew that.
Any of you guys, random question, have you guys ever participated in a Jewish Seder, like a Jewish Passover meal? Oh, guys, you have to do it. There's a Messianic Jewish group in Caulfield here in Melbourne, and every year they invite the community to participate in a Christian reading of Passover. And doing that just added so many layers to this simple thing that we do, maybe once a quarter in an Adventist setting. But there are all of these layers, reading the story of the Exodus, but through a Jesus lens. We ate like the bitter herbs, which is for them is not a bitter herbs. We had horseradish, and I'm watching these little I sat at the kids' table. I don't know how I ended up at the kids' table, but I watched these kids. Yeah, it's telling. They got this teaspoon of horseradish, and I'm like, how much do I get? Like, get that, pile it up, and I stick it. That thing burnt my mouth. I'm like, oh, whoa. The water just started flowing from my eyes. I'm like, why did you do that? You're meant to have tears. And I'm like, yeah, a little bit won't give you tears. You need a lot. I've never had any experience like that in church. I'm not saying we should participate in a Jewish Seder, but it was interesting to see how tangent the experience of Jesus' journey to the cross was made through participating in this meal. It was really beautiful. If you could do this, guys, it's really cool.
My understanding, reflecting on history, is that one of the emphasis of the reformers was to get back to the Word. Okay, which is great. As Adventists, we say amen. The Word ought to be prioritized, ought to be the basis of our faith, of our teaching, of our doctrines, etc., etc., etc. But I think the Reformers, as a result, their ecclesiology, or the way that their church was run, now became like the preacher's sermon became the focal point, and can I even say that the primary reason for why everyone would gather to worship corporately, okay? And that's great, but when I just reflect on some of the benefits of corporate worship that we just spoke about mutual edification and participation and everything like that, I just wonder whether if we limit our corporate worship services to merely be a preacher preaching, which is great and which is fantastic and which we ought to continue doing, but are we robbing ourselves of a more richer, of a more fuller corporate worship experience if we don't think about how we're constructing our services to involve more participation, to have some mystery, to have some sort of, whether you call it symbolism or some sort of, how can we flesh this out? This is what I'm trying to get a sense of.
And I think the cool thing that we have within Adventism is that most churches do communion once a quarter, right? And that's where you come together, you do foot washing, and you do the bread and the grape juice, right? That Jesus set up all the way back on the night before he died. He set that up in a table, sitting around a table with his disciples, and told us that we'd keep doing that until we were able to do it with him. And I just think it's so interesting, right? Because I don't know how you've seen that service, but when I was growing up, by the way, I love my family, and my parents will probably listen. So, hello guys. But the thing is, when I was growing up, if it was communion, we would either skip church or we would be at church. But when it was foot washing time, we would stay and we'd listen to the kids' story because nobody was getting near these feet. And those are basically the two options, right? And then, I'm going to be honest, when I started studying theology, when I was preparing to be a pastor, I still hadn't done a foot washing. Wow. I hadn't. And just because I continued going to church with my parents, and then when I was going to church at college, it was a very big church that I was going to. It was at the uni campus. Big challenge for them to do it, so they didn't do it very much. But then one Sabbath they did it, and I looked at my friend and I was like, I think I've got to do it. I'm gonna be a pastor. I'm gonna go wash feet. And it was just the greatest experience to be able to do that. And I think we grow tired of these things because we have to do it every few months, we've got to do that again. I don't want to do that. I don't want to touch someone's feet. It's boring when we go through the communion and you look at it and you're like, no, this is actually incredible. And bringing back some excitement around that. Wow, how cool is it that we get to model, model Christ's death and his service through. Sorry, I'm getting mixed up there, but that we get to do that through
tangible things.
Yes,
washing feet.
He set it up for us, and we get to still do it thousands of years later.
Yeah.
How incredible is that we get to do that? And so I think that's part of bringing back the mystery and bringing back the enchantment and excitement. Yeah. How cool is it that we get to do that? And so the Sabbath that a lot of people want to miss, I think is a Sabbath not to be missed.
You're listening to the Worship Project podcast.
Yeah, so good. And Ben and Ryan, do you have any other thoughts around that whole area of what's this idealistic picture of church? What is it? What do we need to be shooting for?
One of my pastor friends told me this analogy, and it speaks into, I know we've touched a little bit on consumerism, and I felt like you were nearly going there when you were talking about how we go to church to listen to a message. It's kind of like you go and you're passive, and what Curly has just shared is not that. It's this active, engaged thing. And the interesting thing, so I'll play a little game and set you up for failure. So just play along if you're willing. But we were talking about Taylor Swift earlier, right? Now, at a Taylor Swift concert, there's an artist. There's like a performer. Who's the performer? Taylor. Then there is a support crew and stuff to help that go well. Who are they?
Yeah, her backup
dancers. Sound and lighting, stage managers, stuff like that. Who's the audience? The people who go. Okay. So now let's think about, do we think about church like that? Because what about if we didn't think about church like that? What if we thought about church like the people up the front are actually the support crew? They're the people who are the prompters. So, and what if we even extended that to the pastor and we looked at him as the prompter and support crew? Who are the performers?
The people sitting in the church.
The people sitting in the congregation. So you've got prompters trying to help the performers to successfully worship. And I perform as all analogies are dangerous, but perform for who's the audience? God's the audience, right? So I wonder, to me, that shifts the way that we can think about church, because we often have this commercial kind of thing that we're used to, like a Taylor Swift concert, and we know the audience knows their place, the support crew know their place, the artist knows their place. And the church is different. The people up the front, they are the ones who are working and conscious of trying to get the audience engaged in worship. So if they're going to sing, it's about not them performing, it's about them trying to help people become be aware of God, and then give him praise. Yeah. And I think maybe when we think about that, that kind of helps us to move away from the passive to the active.
Yes, sir.
Much to add, or?
It's a subject I think on a bit. We're talking about, I guess in some ways that the subject is ecclesiology, right? How do we do church? It's a topic I've been really interested in. At one point, I thought, oh man, house churches have to be the way, because that's what I see in the New Testament. And I got off of like the way we do church today. And God had to lead me through this journey of appreciating that house churches have their place. Your traditional looking Adventist church has its place. But one thing that really stood out for me as I was sort of studying this topic out in my own life is this passage from 1 Corinthians 14 verse 3. And Paul talks about what a healthy gathering would look like for the church in Corinth.
What is that again?
1 Corinthians 14 verse 3. He says, on the other hand, the one who prophesies speaks to people for their upbuilding and encouragement and consolation. There's this whole thing about should people speak in tongues or not, but there's this word that he uses for the encouragement, and that word appears so often in Scripture in relation to the activity of what should happen in a gathering of believers. It's this mutual encouragement. And what I'd love to see in our churches is that we have more of the mutual encouraging. How can we encourage? How can the support crew encourage the rest of the church to go down this path? If you go a few chapters down in 1 Corinthians to chapter 14, Paul continues to expand his vision on what a gathering could look like in verse 26. And he says, what then, brothers, when you come together, each one has a hymn, a lesson, a revelation, a tongue, or an interpretation. Let all things be done for building up. And, you know, I think this sort of foray into home churches that I went down, the big take home I got was it might be easier to facilitate that in a smaller setting, but I still think it's for any place we see God's people gathering corporately, there is a challenge. How do we build up? How do we get to that? There's a quote I found, and this is from the Adventist Review and Herald, very interesting about the formation of the church in the early years. This is from 1862. The church at Battle Creek, this is like the mother church back in the day. The church at Battle Creek needs these preachers less than any church in the state, from the fact that it has more active members than any other church in the state, many of them of long experience and sound judgment. We sometimes preach to them, but often feel when done that a social meeting would have been better. What? What? And it is frequently the case that when we return from spending a Sabbath with some other church, we are told that the brethren enjoyed an excellent meeting, the best in several Sabbaths. Now what is the use for us preachers to get in the way of these experienced living members? I read this quote and it blew my mind, because I think we assume that what Adventism looks like today is what it's always looked like, and that's not the case. There were large Adventist churches where people were building each other up and bringing each other closer to Jesus as a result. And my heart is that I'd love to see our churches realize that more. I think there's an incredible value to the community as they can step in to a place where, you know what, we talked in the last episode, like how do you, and we'll get there as well, how do you worship through hard times? But if I know that Kira Lee's going to be there to lift me up, you know, if I know that Ben's going to be there and Dayne, it just shifts the dynamic and the landscape of church, and it gets me excited, and I'd love to see that. Yeah.
And this is why I like this conversation about worship, okay? Because what we're not saying is worship can only be done during our 11 till 12 service, okay? That's what we're not saying. So our 11 to 12 service has great benefit because we can all get together in unity and we can preach a message, we can sing together, and so it ticks some of these boxes. But then because worship is so much more than that, it also means we can meet in our Sabbath school classes, or we can meet in our midweek groups, or we can come together for our prayer meeting or whatever, where these are smaller, and so we're not getting some of these big big things that we're getting on for our Sabbath service, but we are getting forums where we can be sharing with each other, or where we can be bringing an instruction or an encouragement, or the verse you just shared. So we've got all these things in place as a church, and I'm not saying that we're perfect, and I'm not saying that there's not room for us to explore other options, but when we look at worship holistically, right, when we go service on Sabbath, when we go midweek gatherings and small groups and Sabbath school classes, we're starting to get this comprehensive picture of how we can actually do all these things that we've been talking about. So I think the encouragement to our listeners is to say, think of worship more broadly than just this. Engage in all these things that the church does, because it's only through that you'll be able to live out some of these biblical mandates that are actually given to us as a church. And that overflows, or maybe it doesn't overflow, but that has a link now to us as individuals. Because we've been talking about corporately and gathering as a big church and gathering as small groups, and this is all great, but what does worship look like for us as individual people? Because this is related but also separate. And I just want to pivot now to just talk about worship as individuals, and what are some of the benefits, but what are some of the disadvantages or challenges, or like on the flip side, if we only ever gather in corporate and never do personal or family worships, what does that look like? So this is where I want to head now. But actually, as I look at the time, my goodness, can you believe that we've almost been talking for an hour about corporate worship, which is fantastic, and we ought to have done that. So what we're going to do, I think, is we're going to push individual worship into its own episode. It might be the next one or something like that. So look, in light of the fact we don't have time to really dig deep into individual worship in this episode, I think there's just a couple of things that we still need to just say to fully land the plane on this corporate sort of context. And when I read the Bible, we've touched on this briefly, but when I read through the Bible, there's this idea of sacrifice that keeps coming. I mean, it's very vivid in the Old Testament. We're bringing and we're literally sacrificing. But listen to this, Ephesians 5:2. Paul says, "And walk in love as Christ also loved us and gave himself up for us as an offering and a sacrifice for God for a sweet-smelling aroma." Right? That's talking about what Jesus did for us. But I think there's a sense in which when we are worshipping corporately, there's an extent to which we're also imitating Christ by offering something, by sacrificing something, there's something like that I just want us to tease out really, really quickly, because it's come up a few times already. So, Ben, I don't know if you have any thoughts to kick us off on that idea.
I wonder whether there's, in the why we worship, we kind of talked about there's a little bit of tension between we do it knowing that we're going to get benefit, but that's not why we do it. Yeah. I wonder whether we're seeing that playing out here in this corporate context, in that we know that we're going to get a benefit from going and participating in this corporate worship, but that shouldn't be the why, because there's actually something, we want to worship God and we want to have him in the forefront of our mind, but we also recognize that that's going to benefit ourselves, but with corporate, it's going to benefit others. So when we go to engage in that corporate worship, do we have a mindset that it's like, this is all about me? Or do we have a mindset of, this is about me, but I actually play a role in helping my fellow family members to connect with God too?
Yeah, exactly. I love that. But Kira and Ryan, anything to jump on this idea of offering, this idea of sacrifice? Look, what do you do if you go into a church that's not quite your style? Do you go, not for me today, I'm leaving? Or what's your response? What's your posture?
I think that you still can, you can still worship God in that, even if it's not your style. I think just recognizing, wow, how cool is it that everyone here is praising God? Everyone here is worshiping together. And it's not the way that I'm used to worshiping God, but we're all coming together to do that and being able to acknowledge and appreciate that. And then looking for, hey, we said it's not all about me, but also the worship, when we come together to worship, we do walk away with something because we've been with our family, but also it's like we take away something to take out back as we leave to go with us. And so looking for what is there, what message does God have, and I know we weren't going to go individualistic, but I think that it's true that what message does God have for me? I think that's okay to look for.
I'm excited. I didn't know you were going to ask that question, Dayne. I've got a mate, and he told me this when I was a teenager, and mate, epically wise, and I'm so grateful he did this, because I was whinging to him about a church service that I was in. I was like, come on, this, blah, blah, blah. And I said, and he's like, nah, it's all right, mate. And I'm like, how do you deal with this? And this is what he said, and I've remembered it. He says, when I find myself in that place, he says, I pray to God and say, God, whoever needed to hear this today, I pray that they're here and that they're open to what God has to tell them. And I don't know, let that seep over you for a second, because when I do that, my mindset completely changes, because I'm actually part of the worship service all of a sudden. Because even though I thought I wasn't getting anything out of it, I actually participate in God's wondrous plan to spread the good news and gospel to people. And so to put myself in a place where I say, God, please help the person who needed to hear this to be here today and to hear what you have to tell them, it shifts me. And I've tried to hang on to that.
And in a sense, that's your offering. That's your...
Yeah. So I still get to participate, and I still, even though I thought this was not my thing.
You're listening to the Worship Project podcast.
Ryan, I just want to give opportunity for you to say anything. I know
I resonate with everything that you've all said. I've been mulling it over and drawing it into the situation. A lot of pastors will find themselves in at one point or another is where you're placed in a church and the worship style or the way that the service is conducted is so it's different to what you do, and you have the luxury to just get up and go. And I've found in my ministry at moments there's this desire to go, well, I will make them like what I like. And God has to step in and go, whoa, like, son, step back, like, just have a look at yourself. Like, this is really not a good posture to have. And I love what this person in your life said, Ben, because I've realized God needs all of his churches to reach the world. He needs all of the different expressions we have. We've just come off a season of praying together for our church, with my church, for some direction. And yeah, it's a very traditional church. And I found that God has brought, through this time of prayer, about 4 or 5 people from the community. It was one of the prayers I had. And in my heart, I was wondering, God, well, how will they receive a very traditional Adventist church? And it's been just what they've been looking for, time after time. And if I was to impose what I like and what I want, would it have been the right thing? I don't know. Maybe not. And so God can use that. And I think it takes that humble posture. It's very humbling to actually go, okay, God, I'm going to place myself in a position where not what I want, but maybe what's best for the community. It's been a hard thing to come by. And we're all changing as well. As like we're not, I don't know about you guys, but I have changed over the course of my life. So to expect everybody else to like what I like is a bit of just a false way of thinking, because I too have been changing over the years. Yeah. For what it's worth.
Yeah, no, fantastic. So look, in wrapping this up now, this corporate worship thing, what we're saying really is that yes, corporate worship is important, and yes, everyone, you ought to be involved in worshiping corporately with a group of people, and that involves the what we would traditionally call the divine service. It involves smaller group Sabbath schools, but at the end of the day, right, worship is going to look differently for each and every one of us, because we haven't spoken about this, but I think we might go there in our next episode, but we all have different temperaments, and we have different ways of expressing ourselves and thereby connecting with God. But when we're all together corporately, there is this sense in which, yes, I'm here for me, but actually I'm really here as this is my offering. I'm really here because I want to make this thing work, because this is God's plan. And so I'm surrendering all that. And I'm actually here not for me, but I'm here for God. I'm here to give glory to him. And if that looks like singing these hymns, or if that looks like singing this, or if that looks like talking to this person, or sitting next to this person, or giving up my chair for this person, then this is all part of my worship towards him. And that's also a big sense of what we're doing when we worship corporately. And it's what I'm hearing from you, and just wanting to reflect back to you, just to get your nods of agreement to make sure I'm landing this in the right spot. So look, I suppose what's been alluded to, and I say this just as a bit of a teaser for our next episode, is that there is this link between our individual worship and what that means as we come to corporate worship, and vice versa. What we do corporately impacts in some way our individual worship space. And we were going to unpack that in this episode. We've run out of time, and so we're going to have to park that for another episode, but that's okay, because I think we've been able to have some valuable discussions. We've been able to share some good thoughts, and I hope that you've been blessed as you've tuned in today, and I hope that you are encouraged to go and back into your local church, or to attend a local church, and to be able to serve God and be part of the unveiling of this mystery that the gospel has brought to our understanding and brought to our knowledge as we act out now what will be our reality in the eschaton. So thanks Kira Lee, thanks Ryan, thanks Ben, and we'll see you all next time. God bless you until then.
Thanks for listening to the Worship Project podcast. Subscribe to the show on all good podcast platforms. Find us, follow us, and let us know what you think about today's show at the Worship Project Australia on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. Discover more at theworshipproject.com.au.